Hello, everybody. So, this presentation is called Software Supply Chain, the Missing Links. My name is John Willis, also known as Botchgaloop. Just quick about my background. For people who don't know me, I go by this handle of Botchgaloop. I'm probably best known for being co-author of the DevOps Handbook, although I've written about 12 books over the last 40 years. Some notable is Beyond the Phoenix Project I did with Gene Kim. Also spent over the last 5 years quite a bit of time in what we're calling modern governance now, but started out as what we call DevOps automated governance, which actually a little over a year ago, we turned it into a novel, sort of based on the Phoenix Project model. We'll talk a little bit about that, but I've given other presentations. It's not about investing. It's about a bank that almost loses its license because of some of the missing link things in their software supply chain. And then I've had this 10-year passion of a gentleman named Dr. Deming, and that book will be available basically in August. So the 10-year passion of basically figuring all this stuff out. And I've worked for a number of companies. I sold a company to Dell. I was early in it, Chef. I was one of the founders of the DevOps movement. I was the only American in the first DevOps days. I actually worked at Canonical for the first private cloud, pre-OpenStack, blah, 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 blah. I also spent on an executive team at Red Hat for 3 years. And then recently I worked for a startup out of Norway called Costly. So I'm going to go ahead and move on here. So the couple of things I wanted to sort of set some meta points that Mark Andreessen, founder of Netscape, right? And Andreessen Horowitz, one of the most prominent investing organizations out there right now, VC, said software is eating the world, right? Back in 2011, right? I think very few people would disagree with that statement. Even more so in 2023 than it was in 2011. A good friend of mine, Josh Corman, who is one of the preeminent white hat hackers, a mentor to me, said that software is infecting the world, right? Not a commentary on the negative of what we do, and particularly open source, but there's no doubt, even today, but certainly in 2015, the dependency map, all the things that we think about, including what I'm going to talk about, sort of the missing links, affecting the world. And then me and Josh did a project a couple of times throughout our career. Josh is a good friend of mine. We had this sort of notion that it's worse than the worst in the worst, which is software is now screwing with Maslow, the hierarchy of needs: health, food, water, and shelter. So what we do is, as I start working more with industrial companies that sort of blend software, healthcare companies, healthcare devices, even some of the it's more the blend between sort of software and hardware. But certainly, probably the most sort of prominent area is what happens in healthcare. It's a pacemaker, right? Over $1 million a year. It's a $5 billion industry. A fair amount of those have a 3-letter hard-coded password burned into the technology or the hardware. The insulin pump on the right, there's been many stories, in fact, in my book that'll be coming out later this year. I talk about a phenomenal story about basically Bluetooth hackers, basically, going in and, in fact, Homeland Security, the TV show, and even the real life version of Dick Cheney, where they had to turn the Bluetooth off for his insulin pump, and then infusion pumps in hospitals. There's some fantastic stories that people could change, like what would have been 30-minute doses into 30-second dosage, would literally kill people. And the first denial of service related to an actual litigated death happened in Alabama 2 years ago because a denial of service shut down radio oncology, and it was an accidental or birth where a baby died, and there's a lawsuit now because of this, right? So this is real stuff that's affecting, like what we would call the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And the thing I wanted to point out in this presentation, if there is a sort of takeaway, is this this notion of it's a story you've probably heard. If you haven't, it's a fantastic story. I call it the bullet, or it has been referred to as the bullet whole bias. The obvious answer may not always be the right answer. What this was a gentleman named Abraham Wald during World War II. They were doing statistical analysis on planes that returned with bullet holes, and Abraham Wald had this aha moment where he realized, what they were trying to do is weight distribution and repair of planes that had bullet holes, and he realized, wait a minute, we're repairing the planes that are coming back. What we need to be looking at is where the bullet holes aren't. Things like the engine, the cockpit, right? Like they sort of had, this really became sort of the genesis of a lot of discussions around survivorship bias, right? And so like just to look at, like, this is probably common fodder for everybody thinking about DevOps or modern day development experience, right? If we go from sort of the monolithic one change a year, we work our way. There's organizations I work with, where there's, 100,000 changes a year, right? Like we move from sort of monolithic, loosely coupled, rapidly updated, many small microservices, like all the things that you've probably been hearing about all day long. You don't need me to reiterate, obviously cloud native infrastructure. All right, so the landscape is changing about what we could get away with from supply chain, particularly audit, right? Audit, our IT risk posture, what we were able to get away with when, I've talked to companies where I talk about automated governance and things like that. And they're like, wow, we don't need it. And I'm like, well, we do one change a quarter. Well, yeah, of course, like, because your auditor, your second line, and your developers literally and operations could go to lunch and basically go through a spreadsheet checklist and solve that in a day. But when you start getting up to hundreds of thousands of changes and rapid flow, like most organizations, large scale organizations, especially safety critical, they're doing 40 days a year. Sometimes like it's painting a bridge in terms of internal and external audits, right? And so a lot of this, when I kind of focusing in on the bias problem, I think we have a DevOps bias, right? I was early in the DevOps, sort of the first person at the first DevOps days in Ghent. Me, Damon Edwards, Andrew Clay Schaefer, and a few others, Mark Hinkle, created the first DevOps day in the U.S. And, we about 5 years in, Shannon Leitz basically created the DevSecOps manifesto. And it was sort of like, oh my goodness, like we sort of left security, not everybody, but the general zeitgeist of DevOps was leaving security out of the picture. And in the 2020, the Sonotype did an interesting DevSecOps community survey. And if you look on the left there, like the sort of table stakes of what people were doing in DevOps was, sort of certainly WAFs, OSS, SAST. But then if you get to the right, the gap between what people self-identified as immature versus mature was a pretty big gap. So it just tells you that there still is a little bit of a bias. And in fact, I took some of the data from the 2022 GitLab Global DevSecOps survey, and just because I like having fun with things like Pareto analysis, I took that data and I put it in a Pareto chart. And the first bias here is out of the self-identified people who took the GitLab survey, who most likely are doing DevOps, 45% of them were not admittedly including things like container security analysis, DAST, and SAST. But I think we're even further sort of the ops bias, or the people who build the infrastructure, maybe platform engineering, is that 80% of those, is what they call the breaking part in a Pareto chart, which is 80% of those that either are actually doing sort of DevOps, SaaS, and DAS, don't include SaaS in like the IDE, or don't provide developers sort of generalized DAS tools before they hit the pipeline, right? Like, so we're still not really doing a good job, particularly in IT sec, but I would say even worse for IT risk. And one thing I like to tell people when I'm presenting is, don't conflate IT sec with IT risk. And I know that's a heady statement, but just because you're doing security and DevSecOps doesn't mean you're actually solving the sort of second line, third line defense mechanisms designed internally in large corporations to protect the brand. There's a lot more on that. Certainly in the QA, you can ask further questions. And then I just to sort of compound with some of the literature, CrowdStrike does a fantastic job of identifying all things security threat in the global threat report. And just a couple of points. I mean, breakout time is reduced. That means the time to laterally attack from the time they get in your company. But what is more important, which I think is the sort of glimpse into my point of the missing links, which is they said in 2022, 71% of detections were malware free. And so some of that is certainly, intrusion of dependencies, but a lot of that is things like configuration, tokens, not managing secrets properly. And then the cloud infrastructure, like what they call tactics, techniques, and procedures, misconfigurations. So not always devious, but like the adversaries prey on your ability to miss a comma or put two commas when it should have been one, or copying and paste from Stack Overflow, VPC definitions that worked for a prior. I have an example later of a terrible breach at a bank that happened because of that. So here's the thing, right? Like at the end of the day, our problem, first problem is 45% of people that are doing DevOps, according to GitLab, are not actually doing security in DevOps. And then even if we sort of say, okay, well, those are the ones that are at least practicing the right way to think about this problem. If you go back to my ITsec is not IT risk, we still have a horrible complexity problem related to how we gather and audit and show our sort of attestational data related to risk. And I like to equate the problem to if you've ever been to Tokyo, there's two problems with the Tokyo, or at least for me, there was two problems with the Tokyo subway system. One, it's incredibly complex, and I've been around the world, right? I've been to almost every subway system that major cities have. One, it's very complex. Two, if you don't speak the language, it makes it like even, exponentially complex, right? I don't know if that's a stupid phrase, exponentially complex, but like but then I look at, and this is no knock on Sonatype. This could be any DevSecOps architecture. Right? Like this is what a modern complex DevSecOps reference architecture could look like with all the tools, sort of your Jenkins, your Circle CIs, your Bamboo, your like all fantastic problems. I mean, projects problems, they're problems too, but like Sneak or Checkmarks or Black Duck, or, I can go on and on, Sysdig, like fantastic tools that I recommend that you do to solve the ITsec problem. But the problem is when we're doing audit or we're trying to show an attestation to some compliance guideline, like we have this subway map problem of finding the evidence. And more importantly, some of that evidence is actually stored in subjective nature, in like a Jira ticket or in a ServiceNow record where it says, I did this, we did that, we did this. It's sort of like a telephone game. And then the next leap is it's up to you, go find the operational log for that like vulnerability scan, right? This becomes a really difficult problem for so many reasons. One, it's operational data. That means it could be changed. It could be the automation of where it was stored, the directory, the permissions. The people trying to find that change in the evidence are plagued with sort of a non-ETL approach, where like as opposed to an approach where you archive not only the fingerprint of what you do, move that from subjective to objective, like digitally signed evidence, as opposed to sort of subjective descriptions in a ServiceNow record, but also, archiving out the actual report, an SCAT report or a vulnerability scan or whatever, and signing that to the fingerprint. I know this seems like a lot, but so, and then you add this into that most organizations, depending on what industry, certainly in critical safety organizations, you have all sorts of like, SOC 2, PCI DSS, ISO. You have, a lot of people look at NIST, as guidelines for zero trust, 800-204, 53. And then, FedRAMP, like not all people say, well, FedRAMP is only for companies that are government. That's not true. There's a lot of SaaS-based companies that if you want to do business with the government or you want to show that you're available, they're getting FedRAMP low. MITRE ATT&CK. And then if you're dealing with Europe, you have GDPR and now the new digital operating. Like, in other words, and if you really want to see the complexity, go to Compliance Forge, where literally there are over 1,000 risk controls they've identified across 275 control frameworks, of which your organization, if you're a highly regulated organization, or at least moderate to highly regulation, you're going to deal with a fair amount of these risk controls from an audit, internal audit, and certainly external audit perspective. So hopefully I haven't lost half the audience. No, we're still good. So then the question is, how do I create a notion of an evidence vault? So one of the things I'd like to say is DevOps actually has a heuristic. It's the change. So when we do an incident, literally almost all the literature from SRE back to Gene Kim's Invisible Ops, or Visible Ops, not Invisible Ops, to the SRE book, to some research done by John Allspar at Etsy, it all tells us that the last change is the most likely candidate for an incident. It's certainly for internal or external audit. A change is what the auditor typically goes by. And so the question is, how do I get to that last change in one click? Right? From a developer perspective, where you're trying to figure out like something's gone wrong, you've been notified of this through ops or platform engineering or SRE, or it's operations or SRE, or it's risk and audit, right? Like, how do I get to, if change is the last, is the DevOps heuristic, and the last change is the most probable, again, from people a lot smarter than me who say this, then how do we get to that sort of last change? And what we need to do is get to that last change, because we need to understand what is the development process, how can we ensure the conformance, what is the current production version, where is the last release, when was it deployed, all these things. And so we call this the wheel of compliance. And this idea that this notion about evidence vault, right? So we're using crypto. I say, think blockchain, don't use blockchain. In fact, we use a Merkle tree, and we actually use something called SigStar. If you haven't seen it, it's a product it's an open source project that was a collaboration between Google and Red Hat. I happened to be at Red Hat when that was happening, so I got a sort of early glimpse at it. And so how do you get to that first click, that heuristic change? And then more importantly, how do we get to the non-operational evidence, sort of an archived version of the evidence, so that we don't have to rely? And here's a great example, right? I've walked into organizations where they'll have tier 0 customer-facing applications, which have very strict guidelines on how long you have to keep the logs, sort of build logs, commit logs. But they'll have dependencies that are tier 2 or tier 3, like a pipeline. Now, that's a big mistake, but I see this more often than not, where people think pipelines, even if the pipeline is feeding into a tier 0 application, they'll still have it. And they might have more lax policy, where the logs might get rotated every 6 months. Right. And so there you already have a classic mismatch if you're using operational logs as your evidence, or XML, or anything that is generated from sort of an attestation that is driven by a product, by Git, any number of things. And so here's an example. Again, I'm trying to stay away from a product plug when we're doing a lot of work generically with the industry in terms of books and papers. But for example, you might have a pipeline. It is a very simple microservice Java flow. And so we might be able to see immediately all the attestations that were generated. These are the things, so we call it risk as code, right? I think policy as code tends to get a little bit conflated or overloaded, meaning it just focuses on Kubernetes, open admin controller. But what I find is I want from ideation through pre-commit to post-commit to all the way through the process, even sort of multiple stages of from different sort of staging to like a staging to UAT to pre-live to live, right? I want the full chain of attestations, and these are digitally signed fingerprints, right? Which again, this is, and then particularly some form of policy that says these things must exist. They must be green, not red, in order for this to get to either UAT or live, right? And then what's more importantly, that's sort of the first click But the second click is to be able to then pull out this sort of non-operational evidence. And this is just an example for this one, like an audit package that has all the artifacts. Now, here's the thing. In a properly designed, sort of DevOps automated governance, or what we call modern governance structure, like this would be a tarred and then signed package that is now associated with the fingerprint that is signed. So we actually use SigStar for this. And so now what you have then is not only are you one click away from the change, you have that change is not subjective. It's actually digitally signed, objective, non-human created evidence. And then if you want to see the actual evidence, like in this case, the OpenSCAP STIG, if you will, I can collect that. And here's the thing, it's tamper evident. So not only do I have to not worry about, did the automation directory structure change? Did the log get rolled off? Was it permissions for the person who's looking for it? All the things that sort of add to the toil of audit. Not only do I have to worry about all that, it will tell me immediately that if the actual report, which is signed to the fingerprint, that was the policy that said, it would tell me that it's been tampered with. Right. So now I'm assured not only that I'm getting to the right place, it has been changed. It has been, I did an assessment. I was brought in for the SolarWinds breach. And if you want to see a really thing, look at the CrowdStrike MITRE attack framework analysis of the SolarWinds. Sorry, my bad. It's not Sonatype, SolarWinds. I've got jet lag here, so excuse me. But the SolarWinds breach, they actually mutated the log. So really clever adversaries not only will hijack your system, they'll clean up the trace remnants of what they've done. You can't do this with this kind of system. So here's the OpenSCAP. This happens to be based on the Red Hat vulnerability assessment. We were using a Red Hat construct here when we built this. So anyway, so that's the sort of story of the state of the union of where we need to get to. So I want to tell you a couple of what I call missing link stories, just to sort of tell it, which is not all things are binaries. There's an over rotation on binaries, and I think that's important. But just protecting your binaries is necessary but not sufficient. And I'll give you a couple of stories with this case. I used to call this this is the Night Capital one. If you hadn't seen this one, this is incredible. It's a while back, almost 10 years ago. But basically, this was an API anomaly detection problem, basically where somebody was updating a manual update of an 8-node cluster. They only hit the 7 of the 8 nodes. There was a testing solution that accidentally got turned on. They averaged 3.3 billion trades a day. They lost $21 billion. It was $440 million in 45 minutes. The second highest high-frequency trading company, Night Capital, went out of business in 24 hours, right? No binaries were harmed in this. I'm going to skip. I'm a Deming freak, but they got a cease and desist. If you want to read an interesting cease and desist from the SEC, Google Night Capital, SEC desist. It will literally list the things that they weren't doing from a DevOps perspective. The second one, which is the no binaries were harmed in this actually breach, which is the Capital One breach a few years back, right? They compromised over 100 million. In this case, it was credit card applications, right? So somebody had left a bunch of data that was partially tokenized in a bunch of S3 buckets, right? And so that breach actually happened from a crypto miner who understood Amazon architecture, which didn't have to be too clever to understand that, who would run probably millions, maybe billions of curls a day against everybody, hoping that somebody puts in a proxy where they leave bypass on, knowing that if that happens, they could hit the metadata server in, see how many people I've lost. I lost about 10 people. The people who are listening, this might be a little heady of a presentation, but they hit the metadata server, and there was just a whole sort of complex system of cascading failures that happen. In other words, there was a development team that needed an exception to go ahead and put up their own application in a hurry. So they used an out-of-band proxy. They didn't know how to configure it. They left the default, which was bypass on. They copy and pasted prior VPC definitions, which actually were very permissive. Like, add all that up, and this crypto miner just happens to hit the metadata server literally trying to do it against everybody that exists out there, happen to get lucky on this one. They dump the sort of the WAF roles, then they're off to the races. They call this a server-side request forgery, right? Like, no SBOM, no, I love SBOMs, but like no SBOM, no sort of dependency mapping, dependency vulnerability, SCA, SAS, DAS was going to detect this one. Right. So this is the point of the missing links. And just to sort of drive a little further, APIs are not the only attack vector, but they're a very interesting one that tends to be overlooked, in my opinion. Certainly the open S3 bucket problem, unsecure API keys and configuration, right? Secrets management, hard-coded credentials, secrets management. These are all sort of apply to anything, not just APIs. API logic flaws, right? The Equifax breach was basically a struts2 vulnerability, which with an HTML tag that basically gave in unauthorized system full access. Broken object level authorization, right? So there's somebody who's left like different sort of node names in an object call from HTTP. Like we know what that is. API sniffing, and then I think there's a whole sort of flurry of potential. I've got another presentation. I'm talking about the danger zone of service mesh, of moving from layer 3 to layer 7 work. Like we've taken a lot of things that is very difficult for an adversary to attack at layer 3. They have to get in network switches. Now they just have to look for a leaky API in the service mesh, Istio Envoy, whatever. Again, a lot of sort of potential ways for us to get hacked. And anyway, so if you want to take a deeper look on this, take a look at the OWASP API Security Top 10. Basically a full explanation of all these. So what do we do in what I would call modern governance mindset? When I use the phrase modern governance, we talk about sort of a post-cloud native world, like, moving from like one deploy a year or one deploy a quarter to now heavily embedded microservices, cloud native architectures. All those things are just making the audit and even incident management resolution incredibly difficult and almost and to the point where using the human subjective structure is just not going to work, right? 30, 40 days. One of the things about FedRAMP, when you go to FedRAMP, and you're going to see a lot of companies going to FedRAMP that aren't required to go to FedRAMP, but they're doing it for a number of reasons. One is to show that they're following a lot of NIST guidelines, but then also because they want to be able to eventually sell to the government. So if you're selling to the federal government or in the U.S., or you're planning on like at least advertising, you need to start investigating. Well, FedRAMP, you get audited once a month. Like a SOC 2, if it takes you 30, 40 days to do an internal audit on a SOC 2, I can't imagine what that's going to be like if you're going to have to do an audit once a month, right? So there's some behavior changes that have to be adjusted. The security team include the security team in API development, right? Like include security and cloud native issues. Basically look at these models for DevOps automated governance for APIs, API security testing, full life cycle, API discovery and WAF, and sort of some of the AI ML, API threat modeling, API management in portals and gateways. And I've been looking at like a lot of the sort of tools that some of my bigger customers are using today, right? OpenAI and API design validation, things like, and these are not recommended, they're just sort of pointers to what you should be looking at. So I think Kong is a great product, but Apogee and there are others. I'm just putting names here as placeholders for you if you don't know about these sort of solutions, that you can Google them and see what are the alternatives, talk to the vendors. API Security Platinum, No Name. This seems to be something out of Israel, which is a very interesting product. Traceable, API automation testing, Postman, Catalan, API tuning rating, obviously Cloudflare and AWS WAF, or any of the sort of interesting WAF solutions. And then I like sort of went through sort of a laundry list of potential tools that would be related to automated governance that would relate to API development. Swagger, of course. So like I've got like clients that like one is like we've been playing around with actually putting a plugin. Remember that badges screen? Let me sort of go back here. I've got a couple minutes, but if I go back, sorry for the screens bouncing on. If you look at like this screen right here, this is actually in one of our products solution. But imagine these badges showing up in Backstage, in a plugin in Backstage, or ServiceNow, or in Bamboo or Jenkins, right? Like it's the same set. So if I go back to this picture, what I want is whatever your native sort of entree point into looking at audit data or looking why your pipeline might have succeeded or failed due to sort of audit or governance, or looking for incident, the change heuristic. Where does the developer come? It might be Backstage. Where does operations come? It might be from Cosley API. It might be from any sort of platform engineering infrastructure portal. And where does risk? Typically, it's going to be ServiceNow, right? So the point there being that we want to make it as an industry easy for like things like Swagger could be well defined in Backstage, but also like I have customers that are doing sort of using Swagger for API validation as part of the attestation and evidence and even gating. Postman, Startbeer, Apogee, Kong, Salt Security. One other thing that I think is really interesting, I alluded to the idea that I think there's a lot of I think it's a NIST 204, 800-204, which is service mesh. Let me double check that. I get my memory gets sort of confused, which all the NIST, the NIST guidelines, but so it is NIST 204, 800-204, which is very interesting if you want to read that. That's a glimpse into the future of more problems we're going to have with things like this layer 3 controls and traffic flow and things like that, all being changed to layer 7 or even layer 4 or layer 7, depending on what APIs use in Envoy. But the point being that now they're just pure APIs and not just general switch and router configuration definitions. So now a misappropriated or misdesigned or even a new version of something like Istio and Envoy could expose, like, for example, part of Istio and Envoy is to be able to reroute traffic patterns. So you could do sort of like blue-green deploys in it, and that's brilliant. But imagine an adversary understanding that, breaking into your system and rerouting 1% of your financial traffics to some other domain, right? That should scare the heck out of you. And then like I think they're like really should understand what SPIFFE and Spire, how those will affect the sort of east-west. I talk about north-south authentication, even things like Vault are like phenomenal products, but that's sort of a north-south where we're looking at now in sort of clusters and pods, this ability to create these ephemeral sort of token-based authorization structures within sort of a Kubernetes cluster structure, right? So there's just a lot of there that like in this double quote missing links conversation that we have to be aware of, that are just going to make the complexity of the potential vulnerabilities, and probably not more importantly, but more interestingly, make our lives more complex if we're not getting ahead of this from like purposely defining in our delivery flow these things as documented, again, signed evidence vault, stuff like that. So I was trying to keep the presentation to 30 minutes. And I think
almost 30 minutes. That was good. There's something that I'm wondering. There's a lot of kind of a joking conversation about the dev star ops. Like, why do we have to add the stuff between dev and ops? Now, DevSecOps, as you said, like half of people in DevOps are not really including security in their thinking. They have pipelines, they have Kubernetes, they have all these things, but security for some weird reason is not there. It's not like a central part. Hi, Leslie. Just a few minutes still. So essentially, I'm wondering if the DevSecOps really is the meaningful star in that sense, and how do we really get that sec to be really in the DevOps?
Yeah, no, great question. I was one of the original don't call it anything other than DevOps, because DevOps was really sort of a metaphor for just two groups that were not collaborating. And so every time somebody tried to create the dev mar ops, the dev blah, blah ops, I was like, stop. But the thing that I got on board with the DevSecOps, which was, it was a phrase that actually for the first time really invited security into the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so I was sort of like, you know what, like, I'm not going to like over rotate on the phrase.
Yeah, fine.
I would say this, Thomas, is that I wish there's a day that we don't have to use DevSecOps. I would hope there's a day that we don't have to use the word DevOps, and we just know that there's common patterns that we want to do things. But the thing I want to answer your question, I think the way we solve this is through this sort of evidence vault, automated governance construct. There's a book we put out called Investments Unlimited, written by about 10 of us who experience this. The meta point is, when you implement these systems, it forces collaboration between IT risk and developers and security and operations to move all the way to as far as ideation. And now, instead of a far right discussion about why did you break my build, we could have this sort of agreement of maybe a YAML file or a meta policy definition that says, do we all agree that if you like this means this, and if we don't do that, you're going to get a red badge somewhere.
Right.
And it isn't the ultimate solution, but what it does is it's very much like the DevOps problem pre-DevOps. We smash those two groups. And I think I'll say one last thing and I'll leave, which is, when I said earlier, don't conflate IT sec with IT risk.
Yeah.
We're solving the IT sec problem. We're still terrible at the IT risk problem in our organizations. And so we need to figure out how to get IT risk early in on those conversations. And I believe this DevOps automation governance, there's a bunch of companies that are working on this as an idea. I think that is the best medicine for answering your question today.
Excellent. Thank you, John Willis. So basically, we'll just go on to create our internal developer platforms and include an evidence vault to each and every one of them.
From your words to God's ears, my friend.
Thanks so much, John.
Greetings from Eficode, the organizer of the DevOps conference.
Developer experience is regaining attention because having satisfied developers lead to better software and ultimately happier customers.
Reach out to us and let's discuss how we can enhance your DevOps practices together.
Visit eficode.com for more information and have a fantastic time with the DevOps conference talks.